The rifle case hit the plywood table with a dull thud that barely registered over the hum of generators and distant radio chatter. She didn't look up as she unzipped it, fingers moving with the kind of muscle memory that doesn't require thought. The fabric pulled back to reveal worn metal, scratches etched deep into the receiver like a map of every mission it had survived. The finish had faded years ago, rubbed smooth in places where her hands always rested. No bipod extension, no thermal optic, no suppressor attachment, just iron and wood and 15 years of proof. The laughter started small, a snort from somewhere near the coffee station, then a low chuckle that spread like wildfire through the forward operating base briefing room. She heard the scrape of a chair, boots on concrete, someone moving closer to get a better look. Is that thing even loaded? The voice came from behind her, casual and cutting. Looks like it belongs in a museum. She didn't turn, didn't acknowledge. Her hands continued their familiar path along the weapon, checking the bolt, testing the trigger pull, running her thumb along the scope mount that had been replaced 3 times but never upgraded. The room smelled of burnt coffee, gun oil, and the particular staleness that clung to every military outpost she'd ever known. Outside, the Afghan wind pressed against the prefab walls, a low whistle that never quite stopped. Maybe she doesn't know we have new equipment, another voice added, this one younger, eager to join the joke. Someone should tell her this isn't a historical reenactment. A few more laughs. She heard the click of someone's phone camera, probably capturing the moment for a group chat later. Look at the antique the new sniper brought. She's supposed to be one of the best, the only woman in the rotation, and she shows up with Grandpa's hunting rifle. If that opening grabbed you, then stay with me because what happens next will rewrite everything you think you know about judgment and respect. I bring you real stories of extraordinary operators in impossible situations, where the truth hits harder than any fiction. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because you won't want to miss how this unfolds. Now let me take you back to how she got here. Her name was Elena Reyes, though most people at the base just called her Reyes or didn't call her anything at all. She'd arrived on the rotation 3 days earlier, quiet, observant, carrying a reputation that preceded her like a shadow. The only female SEAL sniper currently deployed. 20 confirmed kills. 2 silver stars. A record that should have commanded immediate respect, but respect in these places was earned in person, not on paper. And the moment they saw that rifle, the paper meant nothing. She was 34, which made her older than most of the operators lounging around the briefing room. Her hair was pulled back tight, dark strands shot through with early gray she'd stopped dyeing years ago. Her face had the kind of weathered quality that came from too many nights in too many deserts, too many mountains, too many places where the sun baked everything into the same pale dust. Her hands were scarred, nails cut brutally short, calluses thick along her trigger finger and the base of her palm. The rifle had been with her since her first deployment. A Remington 700, modified and remodified so many times that half the parts weren't original anymore. She'd replaced the barrel twice, upgraded the trigger assembly, bedded the stock herself during a 2-week leave in North Carolina when she had nothing else to do but sit in her brother's garage and work with her hands. It wasn't the newest technology. It wasn't the most advanced platform, but it was hers, and it had never failed her when it mattered. Seriously, though, the first voice said again, closer now. She could smell his aftershave, something expensive and out of place in this environment. You planning to actually use that in the field? Or was it just for show? She finished her inspection, closed the case with a soft zip, and finally turned to face him. He was tall, mid-20s, with the kind of clean-cut confidence that came from too many successful missions and not enough close calls. His rifle leaned against the wall behind him, all matte black tactical attachments and digital optics that probably cost more than her entire kit. It works, she said. 2 words, flat and final. Yeah, but does it work as well as? It works. She picked up the case, slid it under the table, and walked toward the terrain map spread across the far wall. The conversation died behind her, replaced by muttered exchanges she couldn't quite hear and didn't care to. She'd heard it all before. Every base, every rotation, every time she showed up as the only woman in a room full of men who'd spent their entire careers proving they belonged. She'd stopped trying to prove anything years ago. She just did the job. The maps showed a valley system about 40 kilometers north, a maze of ridgelines and compounds where intelligence suggested a high-value target had been moving in and out for the past 2 weeks. The operation had been delayed 3 times due to weather, poor visibility, and the target's irregular schedule. Now they had a window, 24 hours, maybe less. The briefing was scheduled for 1900 hours, but she liked to study the terrain early, let her mind build the three-dimensional space before anyone started talking strategy. She traced a finger along the contour lines, calculating sight lines and fallback positions. The valley opened to the east, which meant morning light would be brutal, sun rising directly into any position on the western ridge. Wind would funnel through the narrowest point, unpredictable and fast. The target's suspected location was a compound roughly 800 meters from the nearest viable sniper position, though that position was exposed and offered almost no cover for extraction. Studying hard. She glanced up. Another operator, older than the others, maybe her age or close to it. He had the weathered look of someone who'd been doing this longer than was probably healthy. His name tape read Morrison. She'd seen him around but hadn't spoken to him directly. "Just looking," she said. "That's a tough shot if it comes down to it." He pointed to the compound. 800 meters, maybe more depending on where he surfaces. Wind's gonna be nasty through that valley. I've done work in that region before. Lost 2 good opportunities because the conditions shifted faster than we could adjust. She nodded, still studying the map. What time of day? Both times around midday. Heat shimmer made it almost impossible to get a clean visual. What about early morning? Morrison tilted his head, considering. Before dawn? Might work. Colder air, more stable. But that assumes we get solid intelligence on his movement pattern. Guy's been unpredictable. Everyone's predictable if you watch long enough, she said quietly. It wasn't arrogance, just fact. She'd learned early in her career that patterns existed everywhere, even in chaos. People were creatures of habit, even when they were trying not to be. You just had to know what to look for. Morrison studied her for a moment, something like respect flickering in his eyes. You really think you can make that shot with that rifle? There it was again. That question, that doubt. She met his gaze, steady and unflinching. I've made harder. He nodded slowly, then tapped the map near the western ridge. If you set up here, you'll have a decent angle, but extraction's gonna be rough. It's exposed on 3 sides. Once you take the shot, you'll have maybe 90 seconds before every hostile in that valley knows your position. Then I better not miss. Morrison laughed, a short bark of surprise. Fair enough. He straightened, glanced back at the younger operators still clustered near the coffee station, then back at her. For what it's worth, I don't care what rifle you use. I care if you can do the job. I can do the job. Good. He walked away, leaving her alone with the maps again. She spent the next hour memorizing every detail. The slope angles, the dead zones, the places where a person could hide or bullet could ricochet. She noted the civilian structures scattered throughout the area, the thin line between a successful operation and a catastrophic mistake. This wasn't just about hitting a target. It was about hitting the right target at the right moment with 0 collateral damage. That was the part most people didn't understand. Any decent marksman could hit a stationary target at 800 meters on a flat range. But doing it in the field, with wind, with adrenaline, with a weight of knowing that one wrong calculation could kill an innocent person, that was different. That required something beyond training. The briefing at 1900 confirmed what she'd already suspected. The target was a mid-level commander in a network that had been responsible for 3 IED attacks in the past month. Intelligence suggested he was moving through the valley to meet with other operatives, using civilian traffic as cover. The window for engagement was narrow. If they missed this opportunity, he'd disappear into the mountains again, and it could be weeks before they got another chance. The mission lead was a captain named Werner, sharp-eyed and efficient. He ran through the logistics quickly. Insertion at 0300 hours. 2 teams. Ground team would move into position near the compound to provide confirmation and support. Sniper team would establish overwatch on the western ridge. Rules of engagement were strict. Positive identification required. No shot unless absolutely certain. Civilian presence meant the margin for error was zero. Reyes. Verna's voice cut through the room. You're primary on this. Morrison will be your spotter. A few heads turned. The younger operator from earlier, the one with the expensive aftershave, frowned. So, with all respect, shouldn't we consider? I've made my decision, Verna said flatly. Reyes has the experience for this kind of shot. Morrison knows the terrain. That's the team. The room went quiet. She felt the weight of a dozen stays, some skeptical, some outright hostile. She didn't react, just nodded once at Verna and went back to studying the operation map projected on the wall. After the briefing, she returned to her bunk to prep her gear. The barracks were mostly empty, everyone either still in the briefing room or already outside smoking and talking. She laid everything out on her cot with methodical precision. Rifle, ammunition, range finder, weather meter, notebook, water, energy bars, medical kit, everything she'd need for a mission that could last anywhere from 2 hours to 2 days, depending on when the target showed. She field stripped the rifle one more time, even though she'd already done it twice that day. It was ritual more than necessity. Her hands moved without thought, disassembling, inspecting, reassembling. The bolt slid smooth. The trigger broke clean. The scope was zeroed to her exact specifications, calibrated for the specific ammunition she'd be using. This rifle was an extension of her body, as familiar as her own heartbeat. Someone cleared their throat behind her. She turned to find Morrison standing in the doorway, his own pack already slung over his shoulder. Mind if I come in? She shrugged, turning back to her gear. He stepped inside, dropped his pack near the door, and sat on the bunk across from hers. For a moment, he just watched her work, not saying anything. Then, I looked up your record. Okay. 20 confirmed kills. Longest shot on record was 1,100 meters. Mozambique, 3 years ago. She didn't respond, just continued packing her ammunition into magazines, each round seated with a soft click. That's impressive, Morrison continued. But the guys out there, they don't know that. All they see is that rifle and they make assumptions. Let them. You don't care what they think. She paused, met his eyes. I care about the mission. I care about doing the job right. What they think about my rifle doesn't change either of those things. Morrison nodded slowly. Fair point, but it might help if they understood why you use it, why you haven't upgraded. She considered that for a moment, then went back to packing. This rifle saved my life in Kandahar. I was pinned down, surrounded, and I made a shot I shouldn't have been able to make. 200 meters, moving target, dust storm cutting visibility to almost nothing. I couldn't see through my scope, so I used instinct and muscle memory. The rifle fired true. The target dropped. I got out alive. She zipped her pack closed. After that, I stopped caring about upgrades. This weapon knows me. I know it. That's worth more than any technology. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood, picked up his pack. For what it's worth, I'm glad you're primary on this. I've seen a lot of snipers come through here. Most of them are good. A few are great. But the best ones, the ones who never miss when it counts, they all have one thing in common. What's that? They trust their weapon more than they trust themselves. She looked at him, something unspoken passing between them. Understanding, maybe. Recognition. Get some rest, Morrison said. We move out in 6 hours. After he left, she lay back on her cot, staring at the ceiling. The barracks smelled of sweat and dust and the faint chemical tang of cleaning supplies. Outside, she could hear voices, laughter, the distant rumble of a helicopter coming in for a night landing. She closed her eyes, but sleep didn't come. It never did before mission. Instead, she ran through the shot in her mind. 800 meters. Morning light. Wind from the east. Target moving through a civilian corridor. One chance. One bullet. Everything had to be perfect. She thought about the rifle lying on the floor beside her cot. 15 years. 15 years of deployments, of missions, of moments where everything came down to a single trigger pull. She'd never named it, never personalized it with engravings or stickers like some operators did. It was a tool, and she treated it like one. But it was also the most reliable thing in her life. more reliable than people, than orders, than anything else in this chaotic profession. At 0300, she was already awake and geared up when Morrison knocked on her door. They moved through the base in silence, joining the rest of the teams at the staging area. The night was cold, stars brilliant overhead in a way they never were back home. The Chinook waited on the pad, rotors already turning, the sound a deep womp-womp that vibrated through her chest. They loaded in with practiced efficiency. No talking, no last-minute jokes. This was the moment when everything became real, when all the planning and preparation narrowed down to execution. She sat near the rear ramp, rifle case between her knees, eyes closed, breathing steady. Meditation, some people called it. She just called it focus. The flight took 40 minutes, low and fast over terrain that was invisible in the darkness. When they hit the landing zone, the teams dispersed immediately. Ground team headed east toward the compound. She and Morrison moved west, climbing toward the ridge position they'd identified on the maps. The terrain was rougher than it had looked on paper. Loose rock, steep inclines, sections where they had to climb more than walk. By the time they reached the position, the sky was just starting to lighten in the east, that deep blue-black that comes before true dawn. They set up quickly, Morrison establishing the spotting scope while she assembled her firing position. A slight depression in the rock gave her cover and a stable platform. She laid out her gear within easy reach, checked the wind with a handheld meter, and settled in behind the rifle. Through the scope, the valley below was still dark, shapes and shadows with no definition. She could make out the compound, a cluster of buildings about 820 meters away by her calculation. No movement yet. No lights. The world was holding its breath. Ground team is in position, Morrison whispered, voice coming through her earpiece. Waiting for dawn. She didn't respond, just continued scanning, letting her eyes adjust to the low light. Minutes passed. The sky shifted from black to deep purple, then to a pale gray that gradually revealed the landscape. She could see the valley now, the slopes, the road that wound through the center like a scar. Civilian homes dotted the area, thin columns of smoke rising from morning cooking fires. Movement, Morrison said quietly. East side of the compound. 2 individuals. She shifted her scope, found them. 2 men, both armed, moving between buildings. Not the target. She waited. More time. The sun crept closer to the horizon. Her breathing slowed, heart rate dropping into that calm space she'd learned to find years ago. This was the part most people didn't understand. The waiting. The patience. A sniper's job wasn't about shooting. It was about waiting for the exact right moment, and then not hesitating when it came. Target identified. Morrison's voice, sharp now. Exiting the north door. Male, dark jacket, moving toward the vehicle. She found him in her scope. 823 meters. Wind 3 knots from the east. Temperature dropping as the sun rose. She made micro-adjustments, compensating for the variables she couldn't see but knew were there. The target moved slowly, talking to someone beside him. Civilian clothes. No visible weapons. He looked ordinary, like any other person starting their day. But she knew his record, knew the attacks he'd planned, the lives he'd taken. This wasn't personal. It was operational. She pushed emotion aside and focused on the mechanics. Breathing. Trigger control. Follow through. Is moving toward the crowd, Morrison warned. Windows closing. The target stepped toward a group of civilians, women and children, heading toward the market. In 30 seconds, he'd be surrounded. The shot would be impossible. She had now, or she had nothing. She settled the crosshairs just ahead of his movement, leading him slightly. Exhaled slowly, finger taking up the slack in the trigger. The world narrowed to just the target, just the shot. Everything else disappeared. The cold. The rock pressing into her elbows. The voices in her earpiece. Gone. Just the rifle, the target, and the space between them. The trigger broke. The rifle's report echoed across the valley, a sharp crack that shattered the morning quiet. Through the scope, she saw the target drop, a clean hit center mass. He collapsed backward, away from the civilians. People scattered, screaming, running for cover. But the target didn't move again. Confirmed, Morrison said, voice tight. Target down. Clean hit. Her hands were already moving, breaking down her position, packing her gear. No celebration, no pause to appreciate the shot. They had 90 seconds before every hostile in the area converged on their position. They needed to be gone. They moved fast, retracing their path down the ridge. Behind them, she heard shouts, the distant pop of rifle fire. Ground team was engaging, providing cover for their extraction. The Chinook was already inbound, rotors cutting the air somewhere to the west. They made the landing zone with seconds to spare, diving into the helicopter as it touched down. The moment they were aboard, it lifted, banking hard and fast away from the valley. She sat back against the bulkhead, breathing hard, adrenaline finally catching up to her. Morrison was grinning, slapping her shoulder. Perfect shot, he shouted over the rotor noise. Absolutely perfect. She just nodded, cradling the rifle case. The weapon inside was warm, still smelling of gunpowder. 15 years, and it had never failed her. Not once. When they touched down at the forward operating base, the sun had fully risen, casting long shadows across the compound. The rotors began to wind down as the rear ramp lowered, and she stepped out into air that already carried the day's heat. Morrison followed close behind, both of them silent as they made their way toward the command center for debriefing. The base had transformed in their absence. Word traveled fast in these places, and by the time they crossed the central yard, she could feel the shift in atmosphere. Operators who'd been laughing at her rifle just hours before now watched with different eyes. Some nodded as she passed. Others simply stared, reassessing, recalculating. The expensive aftershave operator from the briefing room stood near the armory entrance, arms crossed, expression unreadable. She walked past him without acknowledgement. Captain Werner met them at the command center door, tablet in hand, face showing the particular exhaustion that came from monitoring a live operation from a distance. He gestured them inside, where the room smelled of stale coffee and electronic equipment running too hot. Clean operation, Werner said without preamble. Target confirmed deceased. No civilian casualties. Ground team extracted without incident. Well done, both of you. Morrison gave a tired smile. All Reyes, sir. I just watched her work. Werner's eyes shifted to her. 823 meters in marginal light with civilians in proximity. That's textbook precision. How'd the rifle perform? As expected, she said simply. Good. He tapped something on his tablet. We'll need a full after-action report, but that can wait until you've both had food and rest. Go clean up. Dismissed. They left the command center and headed toward the barracks. The base was fully awake now, morning routines in full swing. Somewhere a radio played music, incongruous and strange against the backdrop of armed personnel and armored vehicles. She felt the weight of the mission settling into her muscles, that particular heaviness that always came after the adrenaline faded. Morrison split off toward his quarters with a final nod, leaving her alone in the corridor. She pushed open the door to her room and found it exactly as she'd left it, gear still laid out with military precision. She set the rifle case on her cot and began the post-mission ritual. Field strip. Clean. Inspect. Oil. Reassemble. Her hands moved through the familiar motions while her mind replayed the shot, analyzing every variable, every decision point. The bullet had flown true. 823 meters through morning air that was still settling into its temperature, through wind that shifted every 30 seconds, through the space between life and death. And the rifle, that 15-year-old weapon everyone had mocked, had delivered the round exactly where she'd aimed it. No malfunction, no deviation, just physics and training and trust. She was halfway through cleaning the barrel when someone knocked. She didn't look up. It's open. The door swung inward and 3 people entered. The expensive aftershave operator, whose name she now remembered was Daniels. A female communications specialist named Torres. And a younger sniper named Chen who'd been at the base for 2 weeks. They stood awkwardly in the doorway for a moment before Daniels stepped forward. Got a minute? He asked. She continued working the cleaning rod through the barrel. I'm here. Daniels glanced at the other 2, then back at her. Look, we wanted to say that was impressive work this morning. The shot. The whole operation. She pulled the rod free, examined the patch. Still dirty. She attached a fresh one and ran it through again. Just doing the job. Yeah, but... He trailed off, searching for words. I was out of line yesterday, with the comments about your rifle. That was unprofessional. Now she looked up. His face showed genuine discomfort, the kind that came from realizing you'd been wrong in a way that mattered. She appreciated that more than empty apologies. You weren't wrong, she said, returning to her cleaning. It is old. It doesn't have the attachments yours does. But it works for me, and that's what matters. Torres stepped forward, arms crossed but expression curious. How long have you been using that specific rifle? 15 years. Since my first deployment. And you've never wanted to upgrade, even with all the new technology. She set down the cleaning rod and picked up a cloth, beginning to wipe down the receiver. Technology is useful when it solves a problem you have. I don't have a problem with this weapon. It's reliable. I know its quirks, and it's never failed me in the field. Why would I trade that familiarity for features I don't need? Chen, who'd been quiet until now, moved closer to examine the rifle. Can I ask what modifications you've made? She nodded, and he leaned in as she pointed out the changes. Replaced the barrel twice, both times with match-grade stainless steel. Upgraded the trigger to a jewel with a 2-pound pull. Bettered the stock myself to ensure perfect contact with the action. The scope is a loopholed Mark IV, which is old by current standards, but it's been with me through enough missions that I know exactly how it tracks. Everything else is either original or replaced due to wear, not upgrades. You bettered the stock yourself. Torres asked, impressed. My brother's a gunsmith. He taught me when I was 17. I've done all my own maintenance since then, except for barrel replacements. Those I have done professionally because I don't have access to the right tools. Daniels was studying the weapon with new appreciation. That's a level of customization most people don't bother with. Most of us just buy off the shelf and run with it. Nothing wrong with that, she said. But this rifle is tailored specifically to how I shoot. The length of pull, the cheek weld, the trigger weight, all of it is built around my body and my technique. That's an advantage no amount of technology can replace. Chen nodded slowly. That makes sense. I never thought about it that way. Most people don't. She resumed cleaning, the conversation settling into something more comfortable. They see new equipment and assume it's better. Sometimes it is. But sometimes the best tool is the one you know inside and out, even if it looks outdated. They talked for another 20 minutes. The conversation shifting from rifles to tactics to the particular challenges of long-range shooting in unpredictable conditions. She found herself relaxing slightly, the defensive wall she'd built over years of being the outsider lowering just a fraction. These weren't bad people. They were just young, inexperienced in some ways that only time could fix. They'd made assumptions based on appearances, and this morning's mission had corrected those assumptions. That was how growth happened. Eventually they left, and she finished cleaning her rifle in silence. When it was done, she reassembled it one final time and locked it back in its case. The weapon looked no different than it had yesterday. Same scratches, same worn finish, same lack of modern attachments. But she knew that everyone who'd witnessed that morning's shot would see it differently now. Not as an antique, but as exactly what it was, a precision instrument in the hands of someone who knew how to use it. She showered, changed into clean clothes, and made her way to the mess hall. The afternoon sun was brutal, turning the base into an oven. Inside the mess hall, it was marginally cooler, industrial fans pushing air that smelled of cooking oil and disinfectant. She grabbed a tray and loaded it with food she didn't particularly want but knew she needed. Protein, carbs, hydration, fuel for the machine. Morrison was already seated at a corner table, and she joined him without asking. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes before he spoke. You handled Daniels well. He apologized. That takes character. Most people wouldn't have been as gracious about it. She shrugged. Being angry about assumptions doesn't change them. Proving them wrong does. Is that your philosophy for everything? Pretty much. She took a drink of water, cold and sharp. I learned early on that being the only woman in these spaces meant I'd face doubt constantly. I could either spend all my energy fighting that doubt with words, or I could just do the job better than everyone expected and let the results speak. Morrison considered that. Must get exhausting, though. Always having to prove yourself. Sometimes, she admitted. But it's also clarifying. I know exactly where I stand. There's no ambiguity, no wondering if people respect me because of my work or because they feel obligated to. When I earn respect, I know it's real. That's a lonely way to live. She met his eyes. Maybe, but it's honest. They finished eating and she returned to her quarters for the rest and paperwork that always followed a mission. The after-action report took an hour to complete, detailing every aspect of the operation from insertion to extraction. She wrote in clear, precise language, avoiding embellishment or emotion. Just facts. Just what happened. When she submitted it to Werner's office, his assistant told her the captain wanted to see her. She found him in his office, surrounded by screens displaying maps and intelligence reports. He gestured for her to sit. Your report is thorough as always, he said. But I wanted to talk to you about something else. She waited. I've received 3 requests in the past 2 hours from operators asking to train with you. Specifically, they want to understand your approach to long-range shooting, your equipment philosophy, your preparation methodology. She was surprised, though she tried not to show it. What did you tell them? That I'd ask you first. You're not obligated to take on a teaching role. That's not what you're here for. She thought about it. Teaching meant time, energy, vulnerability. It meant opening up about techniques and insights she'd spent years developing. But it also meant potentially raising the skill level of the entire sniper team, which ultimately served the mission. I'll do it, she said, but on my terms. Small groups, focus sessions, and only for people who are serious about learning. I'm not interested in entertaining curiosity. Werner smiled slightly. I wouldn't expect anything less. I'll set it up. Thank you, Reyes. She left his office and stepped back into the brutal afternoon heat. The base stretched out before her, a temporary city built for war, full of people who were all trying to do an impossible job in impossible conditions. She'd been doing this for 15 years, and some days it felt like she'd barely scratched the surface of what there was to learn. Other days, like today, it felt like those 15 years had given her something solid to stand on. Experience. Perspective. The kind of knowledge that only came from doing the work over and over until it became part of your DNA. That evening, she sat outside her barracks as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed impossible in their intensity. The temperature was finally dropping, the heat releasing its grip. In the distance, she could hear the rhythmic thump of a basketball game, someone's music playing too loud, the constant background hum of generators keeping the base alive. Her satellite phone buzzed. A message from her brother back in North Carolina. Just checking in. Hope you're safe. She smiled and typed back a quick response. All good. Made a shot today that you would have appreciated. His reply came immediately. Distance. She typed the number. 823 meters. Marginal light. His response was a string of impressed emojis followed by, That's my sister. Best shooter in the family. She looked at the message for a long moment, feeling something warm in her chest. Family was complicated for her. Her parents had never understood her choice to join the military, let alone become a SEAL. They wanted her to be safe, traditional, predictable. Her brother was different. He taught her to shoot when she was 12, had encouraged her when she said she wanted to serve, had been her biggest supporter through every difficult stage of her career. He understood that some people were built for this life, and that trying to force them into another shape would only break them. She put the phone away and leaned back against the prefab wall, closing her eyes. Tomorrow she'd start the training sessions Werner had mentioned. She'd share what she knew, pass on the hard-won lessons that had kept her alive through 100 missions. But tonight, she just wanted to sit in the cooling air and feel the satisfaction of a job done well. The target was eliminated. The mission was successful, and her rifle, that 15-year-old weapon everyone had doubted, had proven itself once again. The next morning, she woke before dawn out of habit and made her way to the range on the north side of the base. She'd scheduled the first training session for 0600, early enough to avoid the worst heat but late enough that people had time to wake up properly. She half expected no one to show. But when she arrived, 6 operators were already waiting. Daniels, Chen, Torres, Morrison, and 2 others she recognized but hadn't spoken to directly. "Morning," she said, setting down her rifle case and a bag of training materials. "Before we start, I need to know what you want to get out of this. I can teach you technical skills, but if you're just here out of curiosity, we're all wasting our time." Daniel spoke first. "I want to understand how you make decisions under pressure. Yesterday, you had maybe 10 seconds to take that shot before the target was surrounded by civilians. How did you process all the variables that fast?" "I want to know about equipment maintenance," Chen added. "How you keep your rifle performing consistently across different environments and conditions." Torres crossed her arms. "I'm not a sniper, but I work with them constantly on comms. I want to understand the mental side. How you manage stress, stay focused during long operations." The others voiced similar questions, each one specific and genuine. She nodded, satisfied. "All right, we'll start with fundamentals, because even experienced shooters often have gaps in their foundation. Then we'll move to decision-making, stress management, and equipment. This isn't going to be a one-session thing. If you want real improvement, you'll need to commit to this over weeks." They agreed, and she began. She started by having each of them shoot at targets set up at 400 meters, observing their form, their breathing, their follow-through. Most were competent, a few were quite good, but all of them had small inefficiencies that compounded over distance. She pointed these out individually, demonstrating corrections, having them try again. "Shooting isn't about forcing the rifle to do what you want," she explained as Chen struggled with a series of misses. "It's about creating the conditions where the rifle can perform naturally. That means perfect body position, perfect breathing control, perfect trigger press. You can't muscle your way to accuracy." She showed them her own technique, letting them watch as she took a prone position and engaged targets at progressively longer ranges. 400 meters, 600, 800. Each shot precise, methodical, the rifle settling back into position after recoil with minimal disturbance. "You make it look effortless," Torres observed. "It's not effortless. It's just practiced. I've taken thousands of shots at these distances. My body knows what to do without my conscious mind having to manage every detail. That's muscle memory, and you build it through repetition." They worked for 2 hours, until the sun was high and the heat made further training counterproductive. She dismissed them with homework, dry fire practice every evening, focusing on trigger control and breathing rhythm. No live rounds, just the mechanical repetition that built neural pathways. Over the following days, the sessions continued. She taught them about reading wind, not just with instruments but with visual cues. How vegetation moved, how dust patterns formed, how the mirage created by heat distortion could tell you what the air was doing at various distances. She showed them her weather logs, notebooks filled with data from years of shooting in different conditions, patterns she'd identified that helped her make faster decisions in the field. "Most people think shooting is about the moment you pull the trigger," she said during one session. "But that's maybe 5% of the job. The other 95% is preparation. Knowing your equipment, understanding the environment, building the mental resilience to perform under pressure. The trigger pull is just the final step in a process that started hours or even days earlier." Daniels was particularly engaged, asking detailed questions about her preparation routine before missions. She walked him through it step by step. The equipment checks, the terrain study, the mental visualization where she'd imagine the shot from dozens of different scenarios. How she'd identify potential problems in advance and develop contingency plans. How she'd build a mental map of the operation so detailed that she could navigate it in her sleep. "That seems like an enormous amount of work for a single shot," he observed. "It is. But that work is what makes the difference between success and failure. Between hitting the target and hitting a civilian. Between coming home and not coming home." She looked at him directly. "This job doesn't allow for shortcuts. Every detail matters, because when you're in the field, you don't get second chances." One afternoon, Morrison asked her about Faye. They were alone on the range, the others having left for other duties. The question caught her off guard. What do you mean? She asked. Fee, how do you manage it? I've been doing this for 12 years, and I still get scared before every mission. The what ifs, the scenarios where things go wrong. How do you push through that? She was quiet for a moment, considering her answer carefully. I don't push through it. I acknowledge it. Fear is your brain trying to keep you alive by identifying threats. That's useful information. So I listen to what the fear is telling me. I assess whether it's pointing to a real problem I need to address, and then I make a choice. Sometimes the fear is valid and I need to change my approach. Sometimes it's just noise and I need to proceed despite it. But how do you tell the difference? Experience, mostly. After enough missions, you start to recognize the difference between legitimate concern and anxiety. Legitimate concern is specific. It points to concrete problems, bad weather, faulty equipment, insufficient intelligence. Anxiety is vague. It's just a general sense of dread without a clear cause. When I feel fear, I interrogate it. What exactly am I afraid of? Can I mitigate that risk? If yes, I do. If no, I accept it and move forward. Morrison nodded slowly. That's more honest than most people would be. There's no point in pretending to be fearless. Fear is part of the job. The question is whether you let it control you or you use it as information. These conversations happened more frequently as the training progressed. The operators were opening up, asking questions that went beyond technical skills to the deepest psychological challenges of the work. She found herself sharing more than she'd expected, drawing on experiences she rarely talked about. The missions that went wrong, the times she'd made mistakes, the moments of doubt that had nearly broken her. Failure is part of growth, she told them during one particularly honest session. I've missed shots. I've made bad calls. I've frozen under pressure. Every sniper has, no matter what they tell you. The difference between someone who succeeds long-term and someone who washes out isn't whether they fail. It's whether they learn from the failure and use it to get better. 3 weeks into the training, Werner called her back to his office. He looked pleased, which was unusual for him. I wanted you to know that the feedback on your training sessions has been exceptional, he said. Multiple operators have reported significant improvements in their performance, and more importantly, in their confidence. The team cohesion has improved measurably. She felt a flicker of pride but kept her expression neutral. They're good learners, willing to be challenged. They respect you. That's not something that comes easy in this environment, especially for... He paused, clearly thinking better of whatever he was about to say. For women, she finished for him. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. I was going to say for anyone. But yes, the gender dynamic adds another layer of difficulty. You've handled it better than anyone I've seen. I've had a lot of practice. I'm sure you have. He leaned back in his chair. I'm recommending you for a commendation. The shot you made, combined with the leadership you've shown in training, warrants recognition. She wanted to refuse, uncomfortable with the attention, but she understood that refusing would be its own kind of statement. So she just nodded. Thank you, sir. You've earned it, Reyes. Don't downplay that. She left his office feeling conflicted. Recognition was nice, but it also meant visibility, and visibility brought complications. She'd spent most of her career trying to stay in the background, letting her work speak without drawing personal attention. But maybe that approach had its limits. Maybe there was value in being visible, in showing other women considering this career path that it was possible, that you could be excellent at this job without becoming someone you weren't. That evening, she found Torres sitting outside the mess hall, alone, staring at the sunset. She sat down beside her without asking. You okay? She asked. Torres glanced at her, then back at the sky. Just thinking. This deployment ends in 6 weeks. I'm trying to figure out if I want to come back for another rotation. What's the question? Whether I'm doing this for the right reasons. Whether I'm making a difference, or just participating in something that doesn't really change anything. Reyes understood that doubt intimately. She'd wrestled with it herself many times over the years. I can't answer that for you. Everyone has to find their own reasons for being here. But I can tell you that the work matters, even when it feels like it doesn't. Every target we eliminate is someone who can't plan another attack. Every mission we complete successfully is people back home who get to live their lives without knowing how close they came to tragedy. It's not glamorous, and it often feels futile, but it matters. Do you still believe that? After 15 years? Most days, yes. Some days, no. But the days I believe it outnumber the days I don't, so I keep showing up. Torres smiled slightly. That's more honest than I expected. I'm tired of the mythology around this job. The idea that we're all fearless heroes who never question what we're doing. We're human. We doubt. We struggle. We wonder if we're making the right choices. Acknowledging that doesn't make us weak. It makes us honest. They sat in silence for a while, watching the sun disappear below the horizon. The temperature dropped rapidly once the sun was gone. The desert's way of reminding you that extremes defined everything here. Too hot, too cold, too dangerous, too quiet. Nothing in between. Thank you for the training, Torres said eventually. It's helped more than just my job skills. It's helped me understand how to approach challenges differently. That's the real lesson, Reyes replied. Technical skills are important, but mindset is everything. How you think about problems, how you prepare, how you respond to setbacks. That's what determines long-term success. The deployment continued its rhythm. Missions came and went, some successful, some less so. The training sessions became a regular fixture, drawing more participants as word spread about their value. She found herself settling into a role she hadn't expected. Mentor, teacher, leader in a way that had nothing to do with rank. One night, about 5 weeks into the deployment, she was cleaning her rifle after a particularly long day when Daniels knocked on her door. He looked agitated, different from his usual composed self. "Can we talk?" he asked. She gestured him in, and he sat heavily on the bunk across from hers. "I made a mistake today," he said without preamble. "Not operational, personal. I disrespected a local interpreter, made a joke that crossed a line. It was stupid and wrong, and now there's tension with the ground team because word got around. I need advice on how to fix it." She set down her cleaning rod and gave him her full attention. "What did you say?" He told her, and she winced internally. It was bad, the kind of culturally insensitive comment that could damage relationships and create operational problems. "Okay," she said. "First, you apologize directly to the interpreter. Not a half-hearted sorry if I offended you apology. A real one where you acknowledge exactly what you did wrong and why it was wrong. Second, you apologize to the ground team lead for creating tension in their unit. Third, you do something tangible to show you're serious about making amends. Learn some of the local language. Study the culture. Show through actions that you respect these people and their contributions. Will that actually fix it? Maybe. Maybe not. But it's the right thing to do regardless of whether it fixes it. You can't control how people respond to your apology. You can only control whether you make a genuine effort to do better." Daniels nodded slowly, absorbing that. "How do you always know the right thing to do?" She laughed, a short bitter sound. "I don't. I've made plenty of mistakes. The difference is I've learned to own them quickly instead of letting them fester. Pride will destroy you in this job faster than any enemy. You have to be willing to admit when you're wrong and make it right. Did you learn that the hard way? Is there any other way to learn it?" He smiled despite himself, then stood. "Thanks, Reyes. For this, for the training, for everything. You've changed how I think about this job." After he left, she sat with that comment for a while. Change how I think about this job. She hadn't set out to be influential. She'd just been trying to do her work, share what she knew, survive another deployment. But somehow, in the process, she'd become something more to these people. A standard, maybe, an example of what it looked like to do this job with integrity and skill. It was heavy, that responsibility, but it was also meaningful in a way she hadn't expected. The deployment wound down toward its end. Final missions were completed, equipment was inventoried and packed, endless paperwork was filed. She found herself feeling the particular melancholy that always came at the end of a rotation. Relief to be going home, mixed with the strange sense that she was leaving unfinished work behind. On her last day at the base, she held a final training session. Nearly 20 operators showed up, more than double the number who'd started. They gathered on the range in the early morning cool, and she stood before them feeling oddly emotional. "I'm not good at speeches," she began, "so I'll keep this short. You've all improved significantly over the past few weeks. Your shooting is better, your decision-making is sharper, your mental preparation is more thorough. But the most important thing you've learned isn't a technical skill. It's that excellence comes from consistency, from showing up every day and doing the work, even when no one is watching, from maintaining your standards when it would be easier to let them slip." She paused, looking at each of them in turn. "You're going to face doubt. From others, from yourselves. You're going to have people question your equipment, your methods, your choices. Don't let that shake you. Trust your training. Trust your experience. And when you earn respect through your work, don't get complacent. Keep pushing yourself to be better." Daniels raised his hand. "One last question. That rifle of yours, the one we all mocked, would you ever consider upgrading now? Getting something newer?" She smiled. "No, because every scratch on that rifle tells a story. Every worn surface is a reminder of a mission completed, a lesson learned, a moment where it performed exactly when I needed it to. That's worth more to me than any upgrade could ever be." They nodded, understanding finally what they had in that first day. It wasn't about the technology. It was about the trust built through years of shared experience. The session ended, and they dispersed, but several lingered to shake her hand or offer final words of thanks. Morrison was the last to leave, and he pulled her into a brief hug that surprised them both. "You made a difference here," he said quietly. "Don't forget that." She flew out that afternoon, the Chinook lifting off into brilliant blue sky. As the base shrank below her, she felt the weight of the deployment lifting, replaced by anticipation of home. Real coffee, her own bed, her brother's terrible cooking and worse jokes. The normal world, where the stakes were lower and the weapons stayed locked in safes. But part of her would always remain here, in places like this, doing work that most people would never know about. That was the nature of the job. You gave pieces of yourself to missions that would never be declassified, to operations that would never make the news. And you had to find meaning in that, or the work would consume you. 3 months later, she was back in North Carolina, sitting in her brother's garage while he worked on a restoration project. Her rifle lay on the workbench between them, field stripped for a routine cleaning. The shop smelled of oil and sawdust, comfortable and familiar. "So they are really giving you a commendation?" her brother asked, not looking up from the stock he was sanding. "Eventually. Military bureaucracy moves slow. But they are recognizing you officially for that shot and the training program." "Yeah." He set down the sandpaper and looked at her directly. "You okay with that? I know you prefer staying out of the spotlight." She thought about it. "I'm okay with it. It's not about me. It's about showing that experience and skill matter more than equipment. That consistency beats flash. If my visibility helps other people understand that, then it's worth it." "That's growth," he observed. 5 years ago, you would have fought tooth and nail against any recognition. 5 years ago, I was still trying to prove I belonged. Now I know I do. That changes things." He nodded, returning to his sanding. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, the kind that only existed between people who truly understood each other. Her phone buzzed. A message from Torres, still deployed at the base. "Just wanted to let you know Daniels made a 1,000-meter shot yesterday. Clean hit. He said it was because of the breathing technique you taught him. Thought you'd want to know." She smiled and typed back a response. "That's all him. I just gave him the tools. Tell him I said well done." She set the phone down and picked up a cloth, beginning to wipe down the rifle's receiver. 15 years, and it still felt right in her hands. Still performed exactly as she needed it to. The scratches had multiplied, new ones added during the deployment. Battle scars, her brother called them. Evidence of a life lived in service. "You ever think about writing all this down?" her brother asked. "Your experiences, the lessons you've learned." "Sometimes, but I don't know if I could capture it accurately. So much of this job is feeling, instinct, things that don't translate easily to words. Maybe that's exactly why you should write it. to try to bridge that gap for people who'll never experience it firsthand. She considered that. Maybe he was right. Maybe there was value in trying to articulate the lessons she'd learned, even if the articulation was imperfect. She'd spent her career focused on execution, on doing the job. Perhaps now was the time to think about documentation, about passing on knowledge in a more permanent form than training sessions that only reached a handful of people. "I'll think about it," she said. "That's all I ask." They finished the cleaning together, her brother offering suggestions on a minor adjustment to the stock bedding that might improve consistency even further. When the rifle was reassembled, she held it up to the light, examining the metalwork that had served her so faithfully. 15 years, 20 confirmed kills, countless missions, training programs that had influenced dozens of operators. And it all came back to this: a weapon that everyone had underestimated, and a shooter who'd learned to trust her preparation more than their doubt. The sun was setting when she drove home, painting the North Carolina sky in colors that reminded her of other sunsets in other places. Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, places whose names she couldn't mention because the operations remained classified. She'd given a decade and a half of her life to those places, to missions that would never be fully acknowledged. And she'd do it again, because the work mattered. But for now, she was home. The rifle was clean. The deployment was over. And somewhere in the world, operators she trained were putting her lessons into practice, becoming better at their jobs, staying alive through preparation and skill rather than luck. That was legacy, not medals or commendations or official recognition. Just the quiet knowledge that she'd helped people become better versions of themselves, equipped them with tools to survive and succeed in impossible circumstances. She pulled into her driveway as full darkness fell. The house was small, neat, exactly as she'd left it. Inside, everything was familiar and safe. She locked the door behind her, set the rifle case in her office, and stood for a moment in the silence. Tomorrow she'd start preparing for the next deployment, reviewing intelligence reports and training protocols. But tonight, she'd just be Elena Reyes, a woman who'd chosen a difficult path and walked it with integrity. That was enough. In the morning, someone new would doubt her equipment or her methods or her capabilities. And she'd prove them wrong the same way she always had, with preparation, skill, and the unshakable knowledge that experience doesn't age. Neither does respect. You just have to earn it, one shot at a time. 6 months passed like water through cupped hands. Elena found herself back in the same forward operating base, same prefab structures, same smell of dust and diesel fuel hanging in the air. But everything else had changed. The moment she stepped off the Chinook, 3 operators were waiting for her. Not to question, not to doubt, but to welcome. Daniels clapped her on the shoulder like an old friend. Chen grabbed her pack before she could protest. Torres was grinning from ear to ear. "Welcome back, Reyes," Torres said. "Your bunk's already set up. We made sure no one took it." She felt something warm settle in her chest. Belonging, maybe, or just the recognition that she'd built something here that lasted beyond a single deployment. They walked together toward the barracks, and she noticed other changes. Newer operators watched her pass with curiosity rather than skepticism. A few nodded respectfully. One young sniper she didn't recognize was carrying a rifle that looked decades old, scratched and worn but clearly well-maintained. "Who's that?" she asked Morrison, who'd fallen into step beside her. "Griffin. Showed up 2 months ago with a rifle his grandfather used in Vietnam." Everyone started to give him trouble about it until Daniels shut them down. "Told them the story about your weapon, about that shot. Now half the new guys think old rifles are some kind of magic charm." She laughed despite herself. "That's not the lesson." "I know, but it's a start. At least they are thinking about the relationship between operator and weapon instead of just buying whatever's newest." They reached her quarters and she dropped her gear, taking in the familiar space. Someone had left a welcome back note on her cot, signed by a dozen operators. The gesture was small but meaningful. She'd spent so many years being the outsider that she'd forgotten what it felt like to be welcomed. That evening, Captain Werner called a briefing for all senior personnel. The room was more crowded than she remembered, new faces mixed with familiar ones. Werner stood at the front, tablet in hand, expression serious. "We've got a developing situation," he began without preamble. "Intelligence suggests a major operation being planned by a network operating in the mountains north of here. Multiple high-value targets, complex logistics, tight timeline. We're looking at a coordinated strike involving ground teams, air support, and precision elimination of key personnel." He pulled up a map on the screen. Elena studied it immediately, her mind already calculating distances and angles. The terrain was brutal, steep mountain valleys with limited access points and countless places for hostiles to establish defensive positions. "This is going to require our best people," Werner continued, "and our best coordination. We'll be operating in extreme conditions, long range, with significant risk of civilian presence. ROE will be strict. Margin for error is 0. His eyes found Elena in the crowd. "Reyes, I want you as primary sniper lead. You will coordinate all long-range elements and have final authority on shot authorization." She nodded once, accepting the responsibility. Around the room, she saw no objections, only agreement. That was new too. 6 months ago, putting her in charge of anything would have generated pushback. Now it was simply understood that she was the right person for the job. The briefing continued for another hour, layers of complexity revealing themselves as Werner walked through the intelligence. This wasn't a single target operation. This was dismantling an entire network, requiring perfect timing and flawless execution across multiple teams. The kind of mission that could define a deployment or end careers if it went wrong. After the briefing, she gathered with the other snipers in a separate room. 8 operators total, including Morrison, Chen, Daniels, and Griffin, the young shooter with the Vietnam-era rifle. They spread maps across the table and began the detailed work of planning fields of fire, backup positions, communication protocols. "We're looking at ranges between 600 and 1,200 meters, Morrison noted, marking positions on the map. "Wind's going to be unpredictable in those valleys. We'll need constant updates." "I'll handle primary coordination," Elena said. "But each team needs autonomy to make real-time decisions. We can't wait for radio confirmation on every shot. You'll have your zones, your targets, and your authority. Trust your training." Griffin spoke up, his voice younger than the others but steady. "What if we encounter situations outside our assigned parameters? Targets of opportunity or unexpected threats? Report them immediately," she answered. "But if the situation requires immediate action and you can't reach me, you make the call. I trust your judgment. Just make sure you can justify it afterward." She saw him straighten slightly, the weight of that trust settling on him. That was leadership, she'd learned. Not micromanaging, but building people up until they could operate independently at the same standard you'd set. They worked late into the night, refining the plan until every contingency was accounted for. When they finally broke, Elena returned to her quarters and began her pre-mission ritual. Equipment check, weapon maintenance, mental preparation. The rifle came apart in her hands with familiar ease, each component examined and cleaned with meticulous care. She was halfway through reassembly when someone knocked. Daniels entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might need this," he said, handing her one. She accepted it gratefully. The coffee was terrible, as always, but hot and caffeinated. "Can't sleep. Never can before big operations. My brain won't shut off." He sat on the bunk across from hers, the same position he'd taken months ago when he came to apologize. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead. How do you handle the pressure of being in charge, of knowing that your decisions directly impact whether people live or die?" She set down the bolt assembly and looked at him directly. "You accept that the pressure exists, that it's legitimate, and then you do the work anyway. You prepare as thoroughly as possible. You trust your training and your team. And when you make a decision, you commit to it fully, even knowing you might be wrong. Second-guessing yourself in the moment gets people killed faster than a wrong decision executed with confidence. But what if you make the wrong call and someone dies because of it? Then you carry that weight. You examine what went wrong, you learn from it, and you make sure it doesn't happen again. But you don't let the fear of being wrong paralyze you. In this job, not making a decision is itself a decision, and often the worst one. Daniels was quiet for a moment, processing that. You make it sound simple. It's not simple. It's just necessary. She returned to her rifle, fingers moving through the reassembly automatically. Look, you're going to be in a leadership position soon, if you're not already. And you will face these questions every time. There's no magic answer. You just have to be willing to accept the responsibility and the consequences that come with it. Is that why you do the training? To prepare people for that responsibility? Partly, but also because good training saves lives. Every operator I can help become better at their job is someone more likely to come home. That matters to me. He nodded slowly, then stood. Thanks, Reyes, for the coffee talk and for everything else. After he left, she finished reassembling the rifle and loaded it back into its case. The weapon looked exactly as it had 6 months ago, scratches and worn finish unchanged. But she noticed new marks too, fresh wear patterns from the last deployment. The rifle was aging with her, accumulating its own history with each mission. She thought about Griffin and his grandfather's rifle, about the symbolism other operators were starting to attach to older weapons. It made her uncomfortable in some ways, the idea that people were copying the surface appearance without understanding the deeper lesson. But maybe that was how learning happened. You started with imitation, and eventually you found your own understanding. The next 3 days were intensive preparation. Teams ran through rehearsals, communications checks, equipment trials. Elena worked with each sniper pair individually, discussing their specific positions and responsibilities. She emphasized adaptation and problem-solving over rigid adherence to the plan. The plan is what we start with, she told them during a group session. But the field is chaotic. Things will go wrong. Someone will be out of position, weather will shift, intelligence will be incomplete. Your job is to adapt in real time while maintaining the overall mission objective. That requires both discipline and flexibility. Chen raised a question. How do we know when to adapt versus when to abort? You abort when the risk to civilians becomes unacceptable or when the tactical situation has degraded to the point where success is unlikely. Everything else, you work through. But that's a judgment call, and it's why we train. So your judgment is good when it matters. The day before the operation, Werner pulled her aside. I'm getting pressure from above to include additional oversight on this mission, he said, voice tight with frustration. Someone from Division wants to be in the command center, second-guessing decisions in real time. That'll slow everything down, she said immediately. We need to be able to move fast, make calls without waiting for bureaucratic approval. I agree. I'm pushing back. But I wanted you to know there might be additional layers of authorization required for some shots. She felt frustration rise but kept her voice level. So, respectfully, that could get people killed. If we have a clear shot and we're waiting for someone in a comfortable office to approve it, the opportunity will pass. Otherwise, we'll take a shot we shouldn't because we're under pressure to justify the mission expense. I know. I'm fighting it. But be prepared for the possibility. She nodded, mind already working through contingencies. If they had to deal with bureaucratic interference, she'd need to be even more precise in her planning, identifying which shots could be delayed and which required immediate action. That night, she barely slept. Her mind ran through scenarios, variables, the 1,000 things that could go right or wrong. At 0300, she gave up trying and went to the range. In the darkness, she set up at various distances and practiced dry firing, feeling the trigger break again and again, building the muscle memory that would matter when everything was chaos. Morrison found her there an hour later. Couldn't sleep either, he asked. Too much to think about. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sky begin to lighten in the east. Finally, Morrison spoke again. You know, I've worked with a lot of snipers over the years. Some were technically brilliant. Some were tactically sound. But you're the first one I've seen who's equally good at the shooting and the leadership. That's rare. I'm just trying to do the job. It's more than that. You've changed the culture here. Made people think differently about their work, about their equipment, about their responsibilities. That's leadership. She didn't know how to respond to that, so she just nodded. Acknowledgement without false modesty. The operation launched at 0500. 3 Chinooks carrying ground teams and support personnel, with sniper pairs inserting separately at predetermined positions. Elena and Morrison went in first, establishing the primary overwatch position on a ridge that offered sightlines to multiple target areas. The insertion was clean, the helicopters dropping them and disappearing before enemy forces could respond. They moved quickly to their position, established their hide, and began the waiting game that defined so much of sniper work. Through her scope, Elena watched the valley come alive with morning activity. Civilians moving to markets, children playing, normal life proceeding in the shadow of violence. Somewhere down there were the targets, men who'd planned operations that killed innocent people. But they looked like everyone else, blended into the fabric of daily life. Ground Team Alpha in position. A voice crackled through her earpiece. Ground Team Bravo in position. Sniper Team 2 established. One by one, the elements checked in. The operation was unfolding according to plan, which made Elena nervous. In her experience, when things went too smoothly early on, it meant problems were building somewhere out of sight. Command, this is Reyes. All elements in position. Awaiting target identification. Copy that, Reyes. Intelligence suggests primary target will move through Sector 3 between 0700 and 0800. Secondary targets expected in Sectors 1 and 5. She scanned Sector 3 through her scope, memorizing every building, every alley, every place a person could appear or disappear. 840 meters to the center of the sector. Wind was calm now but would pick up as the day heated. She had maybe a 2-hour window of optimal shooting conditions. Movement in Sector 3, Morrison said quietly. Multiple individuals, eastern approach. She shifted her scope, found them. 4 men, moving with purpose but not urgency. One matched the description of the primary target. But she needed positive confirmation before she could authorize a shot. Ground Team Alpha, can you confirm identity on the individual in the gray jacket? Sector 3 eastern approach. A pause. Then, negative, Reyes. Not enough visibility from our position. She watched the men move through her scope, analyzing their behavior, their body language. The one in the gray jacket was clearly in charge, the others deferring to him. But that wasn't enough. She needed certainty. Sniper Team 2, do you have eyes on Sector 3? Affirmative, Reyes. I've got a partial profile. Stand by. The seconds stretched out. The men were moving toward a building that would block her line of sight. If they entered that structure, the opportunity would be lost, and they might not resurface for hours or days. Reyes, this is command. We need authorization on this target. Can you confirm? She felt the pressure, the desire to take the shot rather than miss the opportunity. But she held firm. Negative, command. I need positive ID. Reyes, division is insisting. I need positive ID, she repeated, voice hard. I will not authorize a shot without certainty. Confirmed, Sniper Team 2 said suddenly. That's our primary target. Facial recognition positive. You are authorized. Elena didn't hesitate. She settled into her position, found the target in her scope, calculated the corrections. The wind had picked up slightly, a gentle push from the east. She adjusted, exhaled slowly, and pressed the trigger. The rifle's report echoed across the valley. Through the scope, she saw the target drop. Clean hit. The other 3 men scattered, confusion and panic evident in their movements. But the primary was down, confirmed. Target eliminated, Morrison said. Clean shot. Command confirms. Primary target down. Proceeding to secondary objectives. The operation continued. Over the next 4 hours, 6 more high-value targets were identified and eliminated across the valley. Every shot was clean, every confirmation absolute. Ground teams moved through the sectors, securing locations, gathering intelligence. The coordination was flawless, each element working in perfect synchronization. But then the situation shifted. Reyes, this is Ground Team Bravo. We have a problem. Civilian vehicle approaching our position with armed individuals. Can't tell if they are hostiles or local security. Requesting guidance. She shifted her scope to their sector, found the vehicle. Three armed men inside, expressions tense. They were moving slowly, scanning their surroundings. Could be hostiles investigating the operation. Could be local police responding to reports of gunfire. Hold position, she instructed. Do not engage unless directly threatened. I need to verify identity. She zoomed in, studying every detail. The weapons were AK pattern rifles, common in the region for both security forces and insurgents. The vehicle had no markings. The men's clothing gave no clear indication of affiliation. Command, I need intelligence on local security forces operating in Sector 2. What vehicles and weapons are they using? A pause. Stand by, Reyes. The vehicle was getting closer to Ground Team Bravo's position. If they were hostiles and they spotted the team, it would compromise the entire operation. But if they were local security and she authorized engagement, it would be a catastrophic mistake. Reyes, they are 50 meters out. Ground Team Bravo's voice, tight with tension. Her mind raced through options. She couldn't make this call without information. But the information wasn't coming fast enough. Then she noticed something. One of the men in the vehicle was talking on a radio, but his body language was relaxed, conversational, not the tension of someone coordinating an attack. She shifted to another man, saw him laughing at something his companion said. Ground Team Bravo, hold fire. Those are local security, not hostiles. Let them pass. How do you know? Body language. They're not on alert. If they were hunting us, they'd be moving differently. Trust me. Let them pass. She held her breath as the vehicle drove within 20 meters of the hidden team's position. The men inside never looked in that direction, just continued their patrol route and drove past. They are clear. Ground Team Bravo confirmed, relief evident in the voice. Good call, Reyes. She released tension she hadn't realized she was holding. That was the kind of decision that could make or break a mission, the kind that required trusting your training and instincts when the information was incomplete. The operation concluded 6 hours after it began. All primary targets eliminated, ground teams extracted safely, 0 friendly casualties, 0 civilian casualties. By any measure, it was a complete success. Back at the base, the debriefing took hours. Every shot was analyzed, every decision examined. Werner was pleased, the kind of satisfied that came from a mission executed exactly according to plan. Division was pleased, though they'd never admit how close they'd come to forcing decisions that could have ruined everything. Exceptional work, Werner told her privately afterward. Every element performed flawlessly, and that starts with leadership. You held the line on positive ID despite pressure from above. That took courage. It was the right call. Not everyone would have made it. Not with Division breathing down their neck to authorize shots and justify the mission. You put the mission and the rules of engagement above politics. That matters. She accepted the compliment with a nod, too exhausted to feel much of anything. The post-mission crash was hitting her, adrenaline draining away and leaving only fatigue in its wake. That evening, the entire sniper team gathered informally outside the barracks. Someone had procured beer from somewhere, contraband on base but tolerated after successful missions. They sat in a circle as the sun set, not saying much, just existing in each other's presence. Griffin spoke first, his young voice thoughtful. I've been thinking about what happened today. That moment when you had to decide about the vehicle. How did you know they weren't hostiles? Elena considered her answer carefully. Experience, partly. I've seen enough of both friendly forces and enemies to recognize behavioral patterns. But it was also about accepting uncertainty. I couldn't be 100% sure they weren't hostiles. But based on what I could observe, the probability was low. So I made the call that balanced risk against the consequences of being wrong. What if you'd been wrong? Chen asked. Then Ground Team Bravo might have been compromised and would have had to adapt. Maybe abort the mission, maybe fight our way out. But I trusted my read of the situation, and that trust was based on thousands of hours of observation and training. You build that instinct over time. Daniels raised his beer. To instinct built on experience. They drank to that, and the conversation drifted to other topics. Stories from previous deployments, plans for after this rotation ended, the usual mix of dark humor and genuine camaraderie that defined military life. Later, alone in her quarters, Elena sat with her rifle and performed the post-mission cleaning ritual. The weapon had performed perfectly, as always. 9 shots fired during the operation, 9 hits confirmed. The barrel was warm to the touch, metal still holding heat from the day's work. She thought about Griffin's question, about how she made decisions under uncertainty. The truth was more complex than she'd articulated. It wasn't just experience and training. It was also about accepting responsibility. When you were in charge, you had to be willing to make the call knowing you might be wrong, knowing people's lives depended on your judgment. That weight never got lighter. You just learned to carry it better. Her phone buzzed. A message from her brother. Just saw the news about a successful operation in your region. Hope you're safe. Miss you. She smiled and typed back. Safe and good. Miss you too. See you in 3 months. 3 months. 90 more days of heat and dust and missions. 90 more days of pressure and decisions and moments where everything hung on a single trigger pull. Some people couldn't imagine choosing this life. She couldn't imagine any other. The rifle gleamed in the lamplight, clean and ready for the next mission. 15 years together, and the partnership was stronger than ever, not because the weapon was magic or superior, but because they built something through repetition and trust. That was the real lesson she'd been trying to teach. That excellence came from the relationship between operator and tool, between training and execution, between preparation and performance. She reassembled the rifle one final time and locked it in its case. Tomorrow there would be more briefings, more missions, more moments that tested everything she'd learned. But tonight, she'd rest in the knowledge that she'd done the work right, led her team well, made the hard calls that needed making. And somewhere, other operators were learning to do the same, building their own relationships with their weapons, their own instincts based on experience, their own ability to lead under impossible pressure. That was legacy, not the medals or commendations, but the knowledge passed from one generation to the next, the standards maintained through dedication and care. She lay back on her cot, listening to the familiar sounds of the base at night. Generators humming, distant conversations, the occasional vehicle passing by. This was home now, as much as anywhere else. These people, this work, this endless cycle of preparation and execution. And at the center of it all, a 15-year-old rifle that had never failed her and never would. Because some things don't need to be new to be perfect. They just need to be trusted, maintained, and used with skill. Everything else was just noise. Elena Reyes, the only female SEAL sniper in her rotation, arrives at a forward operating base with a 15-year-old rifle that becomes the target of mockery from younger operators who value modern technology over proven experience. When a critical mission arises requiring an 823-meter shot in marginal light with civilians nearby, she delivers flawlessly, silencing the doubters. The aftermath transforms her role from isolated operator to respected mentor, as she conducts training sessions that fundamentally change how her peers approach their work. Through her journey, the story explores themes of earned respect, the value of experience over flash, and the quiet leadership that comes from consistent excellence rather than self-promotion.